I want to take a moment to talk about long-term versus short-term rentals. Dive briefly into vacation rentals like you'd find on sites like Airbnb and VRBO, and also touch on owning a rental property out of state. So, long-term versus short-term rentals. It really boils down to this. Long-term rentals give you security, stability, less risk. Short-term rentals have more risk involved, but also have an upside of great income if everything works out in its favor. Now, when I say long-term and short-term, I'm not referring to a month-to-month rental agreement versus a year contract. If you have a rental agreement in place, it probably is considered a long-term rental. The expectation is that this will be the tenant's place of residence. Short-term rentals represent properties that you generally consider as a vacation rental. The benefit of having long-term tenants is you have a good understanding of what your monthly cash flow will be for your property. There is a rental agreement in place for each unit, and it generally stays in place until the end of the contract. Now, when it comes to short-term rentals, there are a lot of variables that play. Now, quick disclaimer before I move on, I don't necessarily think short-term rentals are a bad investment. There are tons of upside to owning them, but you need to be aware of the potential risks and expenses that come along with them. So let's dive into that now. The first thing that I would discuss with anybody considering purchasing an investment property to use as a short-term rental is you need to consider the upfront costs of getting that property ready to rent out. With multifamily long-term rentals, you are generally not expected to furnish these units. There are some exceptions, and many property owners will usually provide the major appliances that stay with the unit from tenant to tenant. Refrigerators, oven, stove, dishwasher, sometimes even a laundry washer and dryer. When purchasing a home for a short-term rental use, you need to be prepared to furnish that home fully. If you've ever stayed at a vacation rental property, you know that the home is furnished top to bottom. All appliances, sofas, beds, tables, towels, dishes, blankets, along with decorative items like paintings, rugs, other art, a bowl of plastic fruit in the middle of the breakfast nook. You get the idea. Basically, you want it to be prepared as if you were going to be living there yourself. So make sure you're factoring these costs in if you go in that direction. Fully furnishing a home can cost anywhere from an additional $20,000 to $50,000. So keep that in mind if you're ever considering this route. Another important consideration is, will people want to stay here short term? Is the location one that will generate enough interest to have it booked at least half of the days each month? There are many short-term rental properties that have no problem covering this. For others, it can be a challenge. Some investors buy these properties and end up paying month after month of loan payments because there just isn't enough interest. So when it comes to these, location is absolutely key. There's a reason they are considered vacation rentals. It's because they are usually located in places where people would like to take a vacation. The last risk to be aware of, which is completely out of your control, is regulatory changes. Sometimes local governments and communities can vote to outright make short-term rentals illegal. And so, this type of thing is happening across the country all the time. Right now, there is court cases happening in cities all across the country where owners are trying to fight back against these regulations. Some are going their way, but many of them are not. So just be aware of the things that come along with buying a property that you intend to use as a short-term rental, because all this really applies. With all that said, it would be unfair for me to mention the flip side of the coin. If you're okay with accepting the potential risks of owning this type of property, there is a huge upside. More risk, more reward, right? Some owners of these vacation rentals can pay their entire mortgage payment in a week of the property being booked. Sometimes within just a few days, depending on location, which means everything after that is pure profit and income. Risk and cost analysis are essential if you're going to consider this route. So now that we have long-term and short-term rentals out of the way, let's talk really quick about buying a property out of state. Do not be afraid of buying an out-of-state property. I have mentioned this several times. Every one of my rental properties is located outside of the state that I live in. Want to know something even cooler? Of all the residential properties I own, I have never seen a single one in person. Not a single one. And there's a good chance I never will. I know that may sound absolutely crazy to many of you. For many, the only properties they've ever purchased were the ones that they were going to move into. So seeing them in person was absolutely essential. I mean, this is the place where you're going to be living, right? Now, when it comes to your rental property, you most likely won't be living there, unless, of course, you plan on living in one of the units initially. But otherwise, you won't. This was one of the hardest things that my wife had to overcome when we were looking for our first rental property. First off, my wife had never lived in anything other than a single family home. As for myself, well, I didn't have that same luxury. We bounced from apartment to multifamily to duplex units every few years. Because of this difference in growing up, it was at first a little challenging for her to get used to looking at unit type living accommodations, but also accepting that people are perfectly happy living in them. Not seeing them in person was a challenge in and of itself, but she got used to it quickly. And now when we're looking for our next properties, seeing them in person is no longer even an option. The listing itself, the professional inspection, and your realtor partner will be your eyes and ears on the ground. There is no reason you have to go and do the traditional house shopping. When it comes to finding the properties in the first place, I use two main resources: my realtor, who is familiar with investment properties, and LoopNet.com. There's a good chance that when you were looking for your primary residence the first time, you may have used online providers like Zillow, Redfin, or Realtor.com. These sites are great for looking for single-family homes, but when looking for multi-unit properties, LoopNet is the only way I go. By the way, LoopNet has not sponsored this course in any way. In fact, they probably don't even know I'm plugging their site right now. I'm only sharing this because it's the only site I would use when buying my first few rental properties. And yes, it's free. This site is great for when you're doing your own searching, but a good realtor will have properties that may not even be on any site. So be sure to use your realtor partner and their expertise. They'll be able to find properties that nobody may even know that the person is trying to sell. So leverage that partner, use LoopNet, great resource.